More Nigerians are expected to sink into poverty by 2027. That's according to the World Bank. Well, the World Bank's latest Africa's Polls report shows poverty in Nigeria is expected to rise by 3.6 percentage points by 2027. Released during the IMF and World Bank spring meetings in Washington, D.C., the report cites Nigeria's reliance on oil, economic fragility, and governance challenges as key drivers. But it also highlights the country's structural economic weaknesses, dependence on oil revenues, and national fragility as key barriers to meaningful poverty reduction. Despite recent growth in Nigeria's non-oil sector during the last quarter of 2024, the bank warns that this progress is unlikely to translate into widespread poverty alleviation due to ongoing fiscal and institutional challenges. Well, let's cross live to our Lagos studios and speak to economist Paul Alaje. Thank you so much for joining us on the news tonight, Dr. Alaje. The contradictions of Nigeria's macro...
Good evening and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, the contradictions at the heart of this macroeconomic data and story of Nigeria. Explain to us, help us understand, how is it that on the one hand we're having a rise in GDP, yet worsening human conditions? How can a country grow and yet sink into poverty in the next 2 years?
Well, thank you so very much. When you study the report by IMF and World Bank at the spring meeting, you see that even the two institutions seem to have extreme opinion or projections on Nigeria's economy. While IMF downgraded Nigeria's growth to 3%, World Bank, on the other hand, increased it moderately to 3.6%. IMF also believed that by 2026, Nigeria's GDP growth rate will come down to 2.7%. World Bank, on the other hand, feels by 2027, Nigeria would have moderately grown again to 3.8%. As if those were not enough. Inflation, there was a wide gap as World Bank feels Nigeria inflation will moderate to about 22.1% in 2025, while IMF feels inflation will worse off to 26.5%. IMF took it further that by 2026, end of the year, inflation in Nigeria, in fact, will go to 37%, not of the before rebased inflation, but the new inflation figure. On the other hand, World Bank feels inflation will moderate to 15.9%. These are two key institutions that Nigeria have relied on over the years. Now they seem to have opposing opinion about the structure, about the macroeconomic environment of the Nigerian economy. So this is what we have. We have seen positive growth around 3-4%. Our projection seems to stay a bit lower than 4% for Nigeria in 2025, 2026 to 2027. But what you've seen that is consistent is inflation. And the question now will be, what kind of inflation do we have? Or what are the factors that are driving Nigeria's inflation? And what are the measures government have taken to combat inflation and in balancing the argument? So it's possible for a country to see growth and the growth become jobless. It's also possible to see growth and you still have high inflation. When you have high inflation with growth, one thing is certain, you are going to have more poor people. World Bank in its report said the Sub-Saharan African has 80% of the entire world's poor people. And if I can give you the data, 80% alone in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia have 8%, East Asia has 2%, Latin American has 3%. What does it mean? From this 80%, Nigeria alone has 19%, DRC Congo 14%, Ethiopia 9%, Sudan has 6%. But for the entire world, what World Bank is saying is that Nigeria now hosts 15% of all poor people, of over 100 million people living below poverty line of how much? $2.15. When you convert that to Naira and you check what that means, in today's figure, you are speaking of 103,000 Naira. Monthly average of monthly income. Now the question is, how much is minimum wage in Nigeria? About 70,000 Naira, and in some states, it's still it's still arguable that some persons might not be earning up to 70,000 Naira. The truth is, the two organizations commended President Tinubu's administration for implementing this tough policy. But IMF maintained cautious optimism. In fact, I can't say that. I really cannot find so much optimism in what IMF is saying to Nigeria, that the report reveals to us that perhaps the policy, Nigerians have not really felt the impact, while World Bank says continue with the policy. In the long run, as they've maintained, in 2024, Nigeria will feel the impact. So clearly, it is possible for an economy to see positive growth, but you see, this growth may actually not translate into quality of life. IMF agree inflation is high, inflation will be high. One back on the other say hopes inflation to reduce, but that poverty is high, and it could even be worse off in the coming period, 2025, 2026, and 2027. In a nutshell, the two of them agreed government has implemented key policies, but of course the impact is still very weak because of a few things. One, the global oil prices. In fact, one of the organizations says that Nigeria may be going through severe pressure because of the current price of crude around the world, as Nigeria has projected budget about $75, and the price may be a concern to our budget. Secondly, it's also looking at weak structure around Nigeria, and IMF particularly is recommending a reform, a structural reform in Nigeria. Well, summarily, this is what the two reports from IMF and World Bank is saying on Nigeria. The question should be to me, what should Nigeria authority be looking at? President Trump recently introduced tariff, of course, which should have severe effect on China. But China had prepared years back such that it could retaliate, while the rest of the world were running to America to have a deal of some sort to demand in Pentagon. But Xi Jinping of China took a different approach by slamming back. Why? He that has the factory has everything. He that has technology has everything. This is what China realized, and this is what I hope Nigeria authority will realize in the coming period, so that the projection on us will not be a reality. The goal must be manufacturing, not just production. Right. Manufacturing, factories must work, energy must be provided. Other than that, some of these projections, unfortunately, we might have them.
You know, Paul, I was just going to ask you exactly what should Nigeria be doing with this contradictory reports from the World Bank and the IMF, and you've already gotten to it. I'd like you to even stress further what we need, to do with this contradictory forecasts.
Thank you so much once again. You recall that, in fact, some of these institutions advise our government that we should remove subsidy, especially energy subsidy, and also to float the currency. And I'm happy that the two of them are not saying that they did not advise at one point or the other, but they are saying that these policies is not impacting our people enough. In fact, one says if we stay on it for a long time, we might see a difference. My advice to our authority or to the Nigerian government will be what China did, what Japan did, what a few countries in South Asia, East Asia, what they are doing, what India is currently implementing, is to take our destiny into our own hands. How do we do this exactly? It's one, creating farm zones and industrial zones. We need to understand that exporting our agro produce will not bring liberation. This is what sub-Saharan Africans have done over the years. Unfortunately, most countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, according to the report that we have, 80% of the people, according to World Bank, of poor people are living in Sub-Saharan Africa. But the moment we realize that our soil is not alien to production, that we can manufacture, we can produce, at that time, Nigeria and of course the rest of Africa can become liberated. I've seen that central bank over time have tried to use MPR to manage what is happening to inflation. But unfortunately, we have not seen that happen from successive administration in central bank. Why? The real problem we have lies in the supply side. And perhaps IMF is saying that in spite of increased interest rates, which of course they are recommending again, the same drug to be administered on ailments that are proving stubborn. In fact, in IMF report, it's called stubborn inflation. What should we do? We need to try a different approach by considering the supply side approach. And I believe that those concerned, especially beyond central bank, which have maintained a certain posture when it comes to monetary policy rate, we need trade authority and fiscal authority to support in this instance and look at how do we have massive export of finished product, no matter how basic it appears, so long as we know that the rest of the world can depend on us for one thing or the other, and we keep expanding in what we can sell to the rest of the world,
Paul Alaje,
then we can add more
quickly.
effects,
Yes.
we can put confidence in our economy, and our country can certainly grow beyond the picture and the projection that we have right now.
Right. Another aspect of the World Bank's report is that the Naira is one of the worst performing currencies in Africa today as we speak, especially in 2024. What do we need to do to shore up the Naira, to really strengthen the Naira in a sustainable way beyond, you know, this back and forth?
Well, what we need to do is to ensure that Naira has more people that have confidence in it. Currencies are driven by confidence and diplomacy. I know a lot of people have said that there is nothing we can do, but I tell you, unlike what we saw when Naira jumped to 1,900, now we are seeing 1,550, 1,600 Naira to the dollar. It's perhaps because we have back on managed float. If you have left it to free float, like we had earlier part of 2024, it could have been worse than what we have now. But we are on managed float, and we are seeing some trade surplus, of course, that is helping us. So what we need to do is to have more confidence, you know, boost confidence of Nigeria to consume what we can produce in Nigeria. And beyond that, Nigeria must become export-oriented. We must think what we can produce. Unfortunately, it is not just private sector that we do this. There is need for coordination. In economics, what we experience might be coordination failures. And until we have some level of coordination in terms of promoting export and local manufacturing,
Mr. Paul Alaje,
local production, I am sorry, we might not have this confidence.
Dr. Alaje, I know you're very passionate about the Nigerian economy. In 20 seconds, if you can, because we really need to go. Another aspect the report talks about is urbanization. And when I saw that, I wonder if these institutions really understand Nigeria as a country. When they say urbanization can help accelerate poverty reduction, and I'm wondering, do the urban centers even have the infrastructure to accommodate all of that urbanization?
Well, I must tell you that most of these international organizations, at best, they don't have a full knowledge of how sub-Saharan African economy works. And that is why oftentimes some countries that have proven to take different direction, they've excelled. China is a classical example. Now we have seen what India is doing. And these are not just the countries that have adopted. You can read about the Asian tigers and the decision they took. Unfortunately, they got some of these projections wrong. And I've said that Nigeria can prove the reports coming from IMF wrong if we can take an alternative approach and take our destiny into our own end. We were once advised by the same institution that Nigeria should, in fact, promote some of these policies. Today, they are saying that this policy is some of the reasons why we are having our challenges. And I've told you before that what makes a good economics is the one that makes projection and comes to pass. 2016, Christine Lagarde told us we'll not go to a recession. We went to a recession in spite of what local economics said to IMF. Nigeria need to be careful in just taking advice, hook, line, and sinker.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Dr. Paul Alaje is Chief Economist at SPM Professionals. You know, Adeswa, as we're having this conversation, I was just thinking, are we too rich to be poor and too poor to be rich? Is that the Nigerian reality?
When they say oil has become a burden and not a blessing, I think that's the case.